the nervous system acts like command central. And in experiences like trauma, whether it's developmental trauma or shock trauma or medical trauma, our nervous system's job is to keep us alive and to keep us safe. And in order to do that, it can go into defensive mode when it picks up cues of danger.
What if your breakouts, hives, or rashes aren't really skin problems at all, but your body's SOS signal broadcasting what your nervous system can't put into words? Think about it. Have you ever noticed your skin flaring up right when life feels chaotic? I have. Years ago, I battled chronic hives that no cream, prescription, or quick fix could touch. And it wasn't until I discovered the link between stress, trauma, and our nervous system that true healing began.
I'm so glad that you were such an advocate for yourself and so curious. And that I think that is really the root solution is that curiosity is can we look back at ourselves not with shame or frustration. I mean, obviously that's going to the frustration and is going to be there and understandably so, but can we pause for a moment and get really curious? Okay, what else might be going on? It's not the allergies, it's not the food, it's not the this. I've eliminated, the products, the diets, I've changed my detergent, I've had the patch testing, I've spent thousands of dollars on all these things, and it's what else? What else? What else? What else? And, that stress, mental, physical, emotional stress, it's never just one thing, right? But it's kind of what we call the allostatic load, the accumulation of all the stressors in our life, whether it's, not getting enough sleep, maybe it's nutritional deficiencies, maybe it's that interpersonal relationship, it's environmental toxicities and other things in our food sourcing. Like at some point, it's that proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back that our windows of capacity shrink and our system gets overloaded. And then we wind up with disease, right?
Welcome back to Happiness on Tap. I'm your host, Leann Herron. And today we're peeling back the layers literally with the brilliant Dr. Keira Barr. She is a dual board certified dermatologist, certified somatic trauma therapy and stress release practitioner, and the visionary founder of the Center for Mind Skin Medicine. She is also the best selling author of The Skin Whisperer and creator of the groundbreaking somatic skincare process. Let's welcome Dr. Keira to the show. Dr. Keira, it is so wonderful to have you join us today.
I'm excited for this conversation. Thank you for having me.
In this eye opening conversation, Dr. Keira and I are going to dive into how the nervous system state, fight, flight, or freeze, shows up on your skin. Why your breakouts and rashes may be more about stress and simple, compassionate ways to rewrite your skin's story from the inside out. So, if you ever have felt frustrated that your skin is working against you, this episode might just flip the script. So, let's get started. Dr. Keira, can you start by sharing a little bit about yourself and how you first discovered the profound connection between the nervous system and the skin?
Yeah, I think most of us who come into areas of work that are outside our conventional training, we usually have had to kind of make a mission, I guess, out of our own messes. And mine started at a very young age. So I was born with two birthmarks, one on each side of my face. And as a kid, I was called coffee stain face. So not the nicest. Kids can be cruel. I did learn, I mean, it's ironic that when I became a dermatologist, I actually learned they were cafe au lait spots. So in essence, they were coffee stains, but that's besides the point. I was like, those kids were smart. But because of that experience, I learned at a really young age that our skin could be a source of shame and embarrassment and humiliation. So I had that felt sense of discomfort in my own skin at a very young age. That shaped a lot of how I navigated my early years because I wanted to hide, I wanted to mask. So I used suntans, right? Except my skin type, I burned a lot. But I tried to hide and mask, make myself small, fit in, all the things. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I wound up in dermatology. I thought I wound up in dermatology because you could practice pediatrics and internal medicine and cosmetics and surgery and pathology, but really, it was that intimate connection between the mind and the skin, and how what shows up on the skin is a reflection of what's happening beneath the surface, and vice versa. And so it really became a through line throughout my entire practice. And again, because of my own experiences, not really paying attention to the signals that my skin was offering, that my body was offering, my health started to fall apart about 12 years ago. And as a skin cancer and melanoma specialist at the time, my own skin, my moles were changing because of all the behaviors that I had engaged in as a young person. And I had to diagnose myself with early melanoma. And that kind of was the tip of the iceberg of like, something's not right here. And then it was gut issues and hormone issues. So it really forced me to pause and take a step back and look at, okay, what is happening? Why is this happening? No one could connect the dots. They're just like, oh, you've got this problem and this hormone problem and this gut issue. And I was like, something like it's not, it can't be all different things. And, thankfully I landed in a mind body medicine training and the light bulbs went off. And I was like, now it all makes sense. Now it all makes sense that these are not separate conditions. They're all downstream manifestations of the nervous systems being overwhelmed, and the capacity to be as resilient has shrunk. So it really just led me to kind of reframe how I look at the body, the skin, relationship between all of the above. So that's a very long winded explanation, but sometimes you really do have to learn the hard way and then try and pay it forward.
You are sure right in that the majority of us that are in this kind of healing profession, um, it is our story. It is how we got here, experiencing different things, and all of a sudden this light bulb goes off, and now we're on the other side where we're like, "I really want to share this with more people so that they're not finding out the hard way." And
Exactly.
you and I spoke before we got here and started recording about my story. And that's why I was so excited to bring you on the show and have you talk about these issues, because I had went for like 3 months of these extreme hives all day, every day. The only way I could get a break at all is if I went into an emergency room and got an injection, and then they'd back off for a little bit, but they'd come right back. And the doctors, like you said, just had no answers whatsoever. They would send me to different doctors, send me to an allergist, go through all the testing, do all these things, and they still had no answers. And so I'm like you, I was kind of like, what is this? Why is this happening? Where does this come from? And threw myself into just investigating my own system and what was going on in my life. And at that time, it was just an extremely high stress time. My daughter had just turned 18 and decided she knew everything and wanted to move to another state and experience life. It wasn't a good experience for her. She got into a lot of trouble. While that was going on, my son was in Boy Scouts, and we were very, very involved. And I was so involved that I became the treasurer because my background used to be in accounting. And so I was the treasurer for Boy Scouts, and I'm balancing the bank, and I'm starting to see money disappearing that I had no accounting for, and ended up finding out that a scoutmaster was embezzling money. And it just broke my heart into a million pieces because we were very, very close with him and his family and the kids. And I was having to report him to the police and go through all this chaos. And those two things were happening at the same time. And so I was like, I wonder if this is stress related. That was the only logical thing that I could come to. And so once I was able to kind of get my stress under control, they started getting better and going away. And I was like, huh, this is interesting. Like I never would have put two and two together. And obviously, neither did my doctor, because at no point did any doctor ask me what my stress level was.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. and not surprising. And the hope is by having conversations like this, and I speak at conferences around the world in academics and to others, like to try and shift that paradigm because unfortunately you're not alone in that experience. And I'm so glad that you were such an advocate for yourself and so curious. And that I think that is really the root solution is that curiosity is can we look back at ourselves not with shame or frustration? I mean, obviously that's going to the frustration and is going to be there and understandably so, but can we pause for a moment and get really curious? Okay, what else might be going on? It's not the allergies, it's not the food, it's not the this. I've eliminated, the products, the diets, I've changed my detergent, I've had the patch testing, I've spent thousands of dollars on all these things and it's what else? What else? What else? What else? And, that stress, mental, physical, emotional stress, it's never just one thing, right? But it's kind of the what we call the allostatic load, the accumulation of all the stressors in our life, whether it's, not getting enough sleep, maybe it's nutritional deficiencies, maybe it's that interpersonal relationship, it's environmental toxicities and other things in our food sourcing at some point it's that proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back that our windows of capacity shrink and our system gets overloaded and then we wind up with disease, right? We may have vulnerabilities and these factors kind of just turn those switches on. And it sounds like for you, it was just the load of probably having your job, volunteering, and then on top of that, you've got all of these other outside pressures and stressors, and then that very delicate nuance, like, how do you handle this with someone that you're close with, that you had respected, and now you have to report them. And what's interesting about hives is I wish that I remember the reference because I'd love to be able to credit them appropriately, but I read in a paper that hives has been referred to as an emotional allergy, right? When all the other factors, I think it's important that we don't just label something as mental, emotional, right? Because there are physiologic, biologic things we do need to evaluate. But when all of that comes up empty, right? We need to look towards the mental emotional. And oftentimes gets left off. And with hives specifically, this concept of emotional allergy that gets overlooked because hives are these flares of red, itchy, sometimes welts, angry welts. So I haven't found anger in my clients as much of the emotion versus individuals who have struggled with being able to speak their truth with having to express themselves. And once, we create that felt sense of safety to use their voice, to vocalize, to normalize that they're allowed to express themselves, the hives kind of melt away, so to speak. So it's really interesting in your experience of having to, right, speak something that was very difficult.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that because that was my light bulb that just went off. I had never thought of it in that way, and that's what kinda started to calm it down. I think it was two-sided. For the scouting thing, it was definitely having to use my voice,
Hmm.
and then with my daughter, it was boundaries, setting boundaries and having to let her live into the situation she created while still, being fearful and worrying about her safety and all of those things, but just having to set some boundaries with her, I think was the second part of that kinda helped my hives start to calm down and not flare up, and the only benefit I had at the time was I had been selected for jury duty, and I was sitting in my car waiting for time to go in and check in, and at the moment I was sitting in my car, I didn't have any hives. But by the time I walked in and got in line, the hives were full blown, and the lady checking people in just said, "You can leave." I was like didn't really I felt it, but not normally like I had been feeling it. By the time I got out to my car, it was so severe that my tongue was starting to swell, and I was having to text my husband and then just say, "I'll meet you at the emergency room." Like, this was getting worse progressively faster and faster.
Yeah.
And so that's when I really, like, had to set the line and figure out what was going on with my body.
Mm,
But, experiencing all of that, geez, let's see, my daughter is 36 now, knowing that I have always had this love of education and learning and curiosity, that's what really saved me when I was experiencing a trauma response from trauma that was literally 20 years prior that decided to show up, except this time it wasn't manifesting through my skin, it was manifesting through my entire nervous system and brain fog and memory loss and anxiety and panic, all these things I'd never had before. But that was the time where it told me, let's start taking these things apart one at a time. And what is the root cause? What is the root cause of brain fog, memory loss, anxiety, panic? Where are these things coming from within my body?
mm, yeah.
Instead of trying to outsource or my favorite thing of pushing it down and ignoring it or denying it, it was like, okay, it's time to get curious so that I could get my control back. Because at that point, I just felt very loss of control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you did. And it's so interesting, this concept of boundaries. If you think about your skin, going back to that experience with your daughter, your skin is your ultimate boundary. It is the boundary between your internal world and your external world. It's your boundary between you and everybody else. And the skin is not a static barrier. It is not a passive barrier. It is a living, breathing organ that is permeable. And so this concept of leaky boundaries, right? When the skin isn't moisturized enough, there's actually a recent paper which was so fascinating, and it looked at skin barrier integrity when the skin is dry and irritated from ambient temperature changes in environment and dietary and what have you. They found that moisturization and sunscreen protection has a direct impact on cognition, mood, and memory because the skin and the brain are embryologically linked, right? They come from the same layer of embryologic tissue called the ectoderm. So they're communicating with each other all the time. So this concept of like, right, what we put on our skin travels through the system and can have a peripheral effect as well as a central effect. But this idea that boundaries can be impaired or porous or leaky boundaries leads to leaky, you know, relationships and inflammation and irritation. And we see that physically, but we also can appreciate that emotionally. So this idea of boundary setting, which shows up in that either irritation, sensitivity, or in your case, hives. So setting firmer boundaries, reinforcing those boundaries, and the stress response mitigates. And so because the brain and the skin have such an intimate relationship, right? There's the skin itself is part of what we call the nice network. It's the nervous system, the immune system, the cutaneous or the skin, and the endocrine system. So we know that the brain and skin talk to each other all the time, like a two-way street. But as part of this bigger, nice network, it becomes like a four-lane highway. So all of these systems are constantly in communication. So if the skin is a little bit leaky and the boundary, the barrier is damaged, right, it's going to send signals to the immune system and to the hormonal system and back to the brain. So the skin is part of that nice network, but many people don't know that the skin itself is a neuroimmunoendocrine organ, meaning it has the capacity to produce hormones, to send signals and produce. It's a stress response organ. So your skin is both a target and a source of the stress response, right? So this is why things oftentimes do show up on the skin so prominently during times of duress or overwhelm or depletion because the skin is so intimately involved in that mind skin, stress response connection. So it's really fascinating to help, when you bring that curiosity that you were talking about, hopefully people start to understand like I'm not broken. I make sense. I make sense because life is chaotic right now, right? I'm not sleeping. I've got a lot on my plate. I have to deal with this very stressful experience and what have you. And so from that perspective, right, the nervous system acts like command central. And in experiences like trauma, whether it's developmental trauma or shock trauma or medical trauma, our nervous system's job is to keep us alive and to keep us safe. And in order to do that, it can go into defensive mode when it picks up cues of danger. So someone's sidelong glance could be a cue of danger. Having to report someone to the police that was a friend and that you trusted is a cue of danger. Having to set boundaries with a child who is potentially in imminent danger is a cue of danger. And so the body responds, the nervous system sends out signals to the immune system, the endocrine system, to your skin of like, we need to go into defense mode right now, protective mode. And this is where we see anxiety increase, inflammation increase, breakouts and flares increase on the skin because the body's doing exactly what it thinks it needs to do to keep you safe and protected. And if that goes on for too long, our resources get depleted and we can't sustain that, right? It's like trying to hold up the roof of a house for too long. At some point, you get tired. And so our body goes into conservation mode, shutdown mode, kind of freeze, collapse. And this is where instead of anxiety, we're seeing more depression. We're seeing chronicity of disease because the body is just using the resources it has just to survive. It doesn't have the resources it needs to heal.
Other than hives and like general rashes, what are some of the other more common skin issues that you see where the system is being signaled a nervous system imbalance?
Yeah, so I would say probably most. I had given a lecture at the American Academy of Dermatology where I looked at 9 different conditions at a minimum where childhood trauma played a role, right? So when we experience, and trauma is not in the event itself, right? We've come to understand that trauma, it's what happens to the system, the nervous system, as a result of that event. Whether we have the capacity to respond or whether it overwhelms us. And trauma is when the nervous system's capacity to respond has been overwhelmed. And it can kind of stay stuck in that state for quite a bit of time. So becomes this hyper responsive or at some point more shut down, as I explained earlier. And so conditions like atopic dermatitis is an interesting one. Eczema is a common condition that we see in childhood, we see in adulthood. And there's actually a really interesting study that it's not even necessarily stress in our own lives. There was showing maternal stress levels and cortisol levels while the baby was in utero. Those children, when they were born, had a higher vulnerability to being diagnosed with atopic dermatitis, and the severity of atopic dermatitis was increased, right? So we talk about trauma, but there's also the intergenerational trauma aspect too that, can affect our epigenetics. So eczema is one, psoriasis is another. Psoriasis has been, instead of the emotion of maybe grief or worry or anxiety, psoriasis, there's anger is an emotion that is not uncommonly associated. A condition called hidradenitis suppurativa, which is a condition where they're really painful boil type lesions that can occur in different areas of the body, especially ones in intimate areas under the breast and the groin, under the armpits, really painful that maybe the public can't see, but the individual suffering with it, it can be really debilitating and limiting. And so there was a study that showed emotional neglect as the trauma. Like sometimes we think of trauma of what did happen, but oftentimes it's what didn't get to happen, right? We didn't get the hug when we really needed it. We didn't get the words of affirmation or support when we needed it, right? It was what was missing. Alopecia, so hair loss is another condition that has been tied to trauma. Skin cancer even. So as skin cancer melanoma specialist, my own history with early melanoma studies have shown melanoma, especially where chronic and traumatic stress has been linked to playing a role in tumor formation and progression and response to treatment. And why that happens in all of these different conditions, right? It's not different pathophysiology. It's a similar mechanism of activation of that stress response kind of activates two different pathways, our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So, what happens centrally from brain down, releasing of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and then the local effect that is signaling release of inflammatory messengers and such. So, it sensitizes the system to go into that protective defensive mode. And if we don't get cues that counter the ones of danger, right? Of threat and danger, the system continues on the way it thinks it's supposed to. So the invitation is, can we provide the system with cues of safety to kind of counterbalance the cues of danger that are always coming in, right? We're wired to, it's not a problem that we have activation of our stress response. The invitation is when the stressor is no longer in our purview, or it has subsided, how do we turn that stress response off? And that's something that we're not necessarily taught, right? Because that happens automatically. And so many of us think something has gone wrong, that we're broken, there's something wrong with us. It's just we haven't been giving enough attention and time to intentionally cultivate those cues of safety to turn the volume on the stress response down.
Thank you for going into each one of those kind of specifically and drilling down to what the emotion is connected to it. I think that is going to be really valuable for people who are listening to this episode because
Yeah.
it's not something like you said that we think of. The one that really chimed with me is boils and
Mm,
neglect. Both my daughter and I get boils. And as you said, they are very painful, very angry, and they're in those intimate areas. So that's going to, it's going to affect your relationships and they're just really horribly painful things when you get them. So thank you for kind of breaking them down by what is going on in the system and relating them to also our childhood trauma.
yeah.
I think that it seems like that is such a nuanced thing that's happening now in the medical field as they're starting to understand those connections. I loved learning more about ACE and childhood trauma and learning more about myself. And I have a very high ACE score, which is not something to be proud of, but it answered a lot of questions for myself. It made me do kind of an inventory. Um, and I've been blessed that I haven't had any major illnesses, but I know so many people who have been diagnosed with RA and MS, and I think those major illnesses now, medicine is taking a different look at it from a completely different perspective, and so I'm sure that's kind of where you from both the dermatology side to now your somatic side,
Hmm.
and learning for yourself how to signal that sense of safety, because like you said, we're just not taught how to do that
Yeah.
as a child or even as a young adult, and how to be able to recognize the immediate trauma versus the signal that's still going on in my body from a trauma that's not even happening right now today. And to be able to question, is this really something that's happening to me right now? Or is this my body doing what it's meant to do, which is send out these signals, and now I need to listen to what it's telling me? And
Right.
so it's such a new picture for us to really get curious, learn more about our nervous system. I don't remember ever really going into in-depth knowledge about my nervous system until fairly recently.
Yeah, I think for many of us, right, it's this kind of new frontier of making sense, right? Connecting those dots. And you named that your A score is high, and it's not something that necessarily to be proud of. And I would argue to counter that, right? Like, here you are. You had to endure all those things and you're still here and have not had major illnesses. I would say that's something to be very, very proud of because you have figured it out. Your system, our bodies are so wise, right? They are here to support us. And even, especially with skin issues and living in a society that really puts, I think, too much value on our appearance as a metric of our worthiness somehow, which is incredibly frustrating. These arbitrary beauty norms that most of us do not fit into, and it creates a lot of shame and a lot of frustration, and there's no way around that, unfortunately. Like, we can't it's gonna take a long time to change culture, and yet we figure out ways, right? In dermatology, and how I came to somatics especially is, like, that felt sense inside the body. So somatics is really derived from the word soma, which is body. It's like somatics is through the body, and we use a body-based approach to healing. And it's not the only thing, right? It's never just a this or that. It's kind of a both and. But we know that when we just do a top-down approach of talking about things, we can get stuck in loops because we know that thanks to Dr. Dan Siegel and his brain model, like, we flip our lid when we're stressed, we can't think straight, and our more primitive emotional brain takes over. And that's where the body comes into play, because we know that so much of the information that the brain is using to tell the rest of the body to function, to what signals to be sending out, is coming from the body to the brain through the vagus nerve. It's traveling through the vagus nerve to the brain stem, and then that's communicating with the higher centers of the brain. It's really nuanced and fascinating. So the invitation is, how do we bring the body into the equation to send different messages, because 80% of the information is coming from the body to the brain, not the brain down to the body, right? So the brain is using the information it's getting from the body to determine how all those other systems should behave and respond. And so the opportunity is, can we pay attention to what's happening in our body, right? Like, how are we breathing? Are we breathing? Oftentimes when we're stressed, we wind up holding our breath. And so it doesn't have to take a lot of time, and there's no way to do it wrong. It's kind of just getting to know, well, how does it land in my body when I have a conversation with someone who maybe I know really well, and I feel that warm fuzzy because they make me feel heard and valued, versus having a conversation with a stranger where I can feel my heart racing. I'm a little, palms are sweaty, and I feel like I can't take a full breath. Neither one is better, right or wrong, better or worse. It's information of, like, okay, if I'm feeling the anxiety, sweatiness, what can I offer myself to maybe remind myself that I might not know this person very well, but they're not out to get me, right? It's just a conversation. So maybe I feel my feet on the ground, feeling that firm connection, checking in with my breath. It doesn't have to take a long time, but right, we can use our body as our guide and as our greatest tool and asset to help us navigate those challenging moments.
Yeah, thank you for going into that. Just yesterday, I was watching a podcast. I love Jay Shetty, and
Mm,
he had interviewed Chris Hemsworth about his upcoming or his new documentary regarding his dad and Alzheimer's. And he was talking about his career and how it doesn't matter how prepared he is for a role, his body still reacts every time he's getting ready to get in front of a camera, and it's sending him these anxiety signals. And he has learned over time how to pay attention to those signals and flip the script from fear to excitement.
mm,
Like, I'm not fearing that I may make a mistake, I may screw up, I may have this, I may have this, and somebody may not like me or something. I just show up and say, I am excited. Like, I get to be in this role, be present, have an effect on people. I mean, it was just so nice to, one, hear a man talking about listening to his signals and finding what worked for him to flip those scripts, to see it from not this fear or heightened anxiety, but pure excitement and joy.
mhm.
That just prepares him differently when he gets in front of the camera, and so I just love that I get to have the pleasure of interviewing so many somatic practitioners who have taught me all of these different wonderful for switching our imposter syndrome or whatever that is to come out different.
Mhm.
I wanna
Yeah.
talk about your somatic skincare, and how does that differ from traditional dermatology approaches?
Yeah, so I left conventional dermatology over a decade ago. Really when my own health fell apart and it led me down this path of trying to figure things out, going to every practitioner and ultimately landing in mind body medicine. And so it led me to create this approach. And really it's everything I learned from every training course that I've taken and tried to put it together. Really for me, skincare is all about relationship, like that relationship between the nervous system and the skin, the mind and the skin, the mind and the body, because our skin, as our largest organ, as our ultimate boundary between the internal and external world, it is affected by everything we think, feel, and do, right? Everything we think, feel, and do either impacts that felt sense of what it's like to be in our skin, that anxious versus excitement sensation, or it shows up on the surface. Somatic skincare is all about our relationship to the things that can infect our skin, whether that is our relationship to stress, how we view stress. Do we see stress as like this bad, negative thing when in fact there are stresses we'd rather not have, distress versus eustress, like the excitement of meeting new people, having a conversation, uh, so relationship to stress, relationship to our environment, right? Our physical environment, our visual environment. Social media plays a big role in that. I encourage people just to notice if they are on Instagram or TikTok, which I'm not on, but I know that's a big, that things happen really quickly of noticing how they feel, any shift in their breathing or their mood after scrolling through their feed. Yeah. So your visual environment can play a lot in term and also like physical and clutter and all that. Nourishment, how we nourish ourselves, not just with food, but with are there things that bring us true pleasure? Sleep. Sleep is a significant component of what influences our skin health because cortisol, our primary stress hormone, is diametrically in opposition to melatonin, which is one of our most potent antioxidants that really rises at night during sleep time to help repair and rejuvenate skin health. So if we're not sleeping well, our skin can't repair itself in the way that it might need to. So somatic skincare, and it goes on, but I don't want to, bore you with all the details. But compared to conventional treatment, I'm not focusing on prescriptions. I'm focusing on the root causes of what are the factors, what are the relationships that send danger cues to the nervous system that keep it in a state of protective and defense mode and be able to teach new ways of being, new skills in terms of those relationships to be able to send cues of safety that allow the nervous system. I'm a big fan of Dr. Stephen Porges and his polyvagal theory. So I use an applied polyvagal approach to skincare in terms of, this idea of state before story in order to change how the body heals, how the skin responds, and what shows up on it. We have to get the nervous system into a state where it feels safe enough to heal. So somatic skincare is all about helping people shift their state into the state, so to speak, that is conducive to healing mind, body, and skin.
Oh, I love that. That is such a different approach from here's a cream. So many times these creams are steroids and then you've got the effect of the steroid or this doesn't work and you keep putting more on thinking more is better. I mean, there's just so many things, but if you have somebody that can spend that time with you asking those right questions,
Yeah.
it is so helpful, and I don't think there's enough people that are doing that, so I'm so happy that there's someone like you that are going out, you're speaking at these large platforms to bring this information to the forefront of dermatological treatment for patients, and bringing up the things that so many medical professionals really didn't learn in med school.
We totally didn't. Yeah, we didn't. The bottom line is you can't heal a dysregulated organ in a dysregulated system. And that applies for gut health, musculoskeletal health, like with an autoimmune and in autoinflammatory conditions. It's all related. It's all the same pathophysiology, so to speak, right? If the nervous system is in a state of hypervigilance, it's going to be sending out signals of doing its best to protect you, which means it's sending out those inflammatory cytokines. It's pumping out the stress hormones, and it's using the resources that would otherwise be required to help your body heal. It's feeling like it's still on the front lines. So we have an
So
opportunity to change signals that are being sent.
I love it. That is such valuable information. Many people feel ashamed or frustrated by their skin conditions, like you were saying in the beginning with your birthmarks. I also have a birthmark on my face. How do you help clients move from shame to self compassion and to teach them those skills that we've never learned?
Yeah, I think it's often easy, right, to reframe of what would you say to, right, classic, self-compassion work, thanks to Chris Germer and Kristen Neff, that they brought to the forefront of like, how would you talk to a good friend or a beloved if they were struggling with the same thing, right? You wouldn't berate them, you wouldn't beat them up because their skin is breaking out, or they have a blemish or something. You would put your arm around them and give them support. And it's that invitation to turn that towards ourselves. Sometimes that's not always easy, right? That may not be the first step. But shame, especially with skin, it's this idea of visibility and vulnerability and being seen. And a lot of that, is little, I guess, baby steps of building that capacity for what would it feel like to feel supported? What would you need in this moment to feel just maybe 1% less shame or 1% more confident? When I work with clients, sometimes like maybe it's the camera off, fair, right? Maybe it's wearing a hat, and there's no shame in the coping strategies and the protective mechanisms. So just naming and normalizing that. And little by little, they're like, oh, you mean I have agency? I have choice. This isn't a problem. And I think that's the biggest thing of like kind of normalizing all the things, even like especially behaviors like skin picking or hair pulling, right? That people might do. It's really, we do these things to regain a felt sense of control in a body and a world that feels out of our control. So if we can identify that that really is what we're seeking, certainty, sense of control, a sense of agency, well, how do we invite that in maybe the smallest way back in? What would help you feel just a little bit more in control? What can you do right now? Yeah. And maybe it's choosing your favorite mug. Maybe it's right, like um something very simple. And as you practice those small things, a little bit of confidence, like, oh, I can do this. I don't have to feel guilty. I don't have to feel bad about it. This is totally normal. This is totally right for me. And then we stack those and we build on those. And I think the most important thing, especially with shame, is having a compassionate witness first. We learn to co-regulate, to be in the presence of someone else who's anchored, who's grounded, where you feel safe, seen, heard, and okay enough to feel vulnerable, is going to give, our system an opportunity to settle a little bit. Right? We can't just expect ourselves to have compassion and just change our mindset from anxiety to excitement just like that. Like, it's not just a mindset, it's a felt experience in the body. And oftentimes that comes from being with another who can hold you, who can hold that space while you're still feeling a little bit of, that bracing. Yeah. So I think that's a big part of the work, is finding the places and spaces or the individuals in your life who can hold you and support you while you're taking those baby steps towards turning that compassion towards yourself.
I love that. It's something that, I guess I never had that thought going on inside me when my hives were at full bloom, because people wouldn't look at you. They'd kind of turn away, or like the lady at the courthouse was just like, "You can leave now," without even asking. me any questions about it. I was just immediately excused and sent on my way. And I understand there's that risk or fear of something being a contagion. But I think too, just having someone acknowledge it while you're able to name it or discuss it or just be like, I really don't know what's going on with my system. And maybe just having a conversation with one person who sits across and shares their story of something maybe they experienced. And that's why I like sharing kind of my story with my hives is if that helps one other person who's having a breakout or a flare up kind of step back and say, okay, what may be causing this? Okay, I've tried all these other things. I've done the allergy testing. I've, like I said, changed your environmental factors from your lotions to your laundry detergent. And you've considered all those things and nothing is still answering the question. Then hopefully me sharing my story, you sharing your story, and that more and more people are getting on platforms like podcasts and sharing their story will help people see that it's not just them. They're not broken, they're not damaged, and learn some of these techniques or tools
Yeah.
to then feel safe, to be curious. It's all so important. And again, I thank you for your time and coming here and talking about these things. What are some simple everyday practices that listeners can use to kind of calm their nervous system and support healthier skin?
Yeah. I feel like there's multiple. There's some of the quickest ones. I think of late, my favorite practice that I have used myself throughout the day um, is what we call orienting. When you think about animals in the wild, right? Like when they hear a noise, what do? They turn towards it, their eyes open wide, and they're looking around, scanning their environment for what's am I in danger? Am I okay? And we can do that for ourselves. So that's like defensive orienting versus, we can use it to invite cues of safety as well. So one of my favorites is just inviting your eyes to wander where they want to wander in your space, looking at the colors, the textures, the shapes, and just letting your eyes settle on something that looks pleasant or intriguing to you. And just let yourself linger there for a moment. And I'll notice and notice, notice what you notice, right? There's no right or wrong, better or worse of what you notice, but just notice what may shift. Oftentimes, especially like I'm in front of my computer's in front of the window. I let my eyes wander outside and I see the big trees. I see changing leaves. And even though I'm locked in or feeling kind of nervous or anxious, when I look outside and allow myself to look over the horizon, and that's another helpful thing of looking, if you're looking close, to allow your eyes to soften and look kind of over the horizon, immediately you may feel like a settling, right? You can take a little bit deeper breath, your chest may open. And that's something I encourage people to do basically throughout the day, all day throughout the day. Like when you're feeling a sense of kind of tense or bracing, just let your eyes wander where they want to wander. It can take 10 seconds and you're like, that's a cute little, I didn't realize like my mug. And then you might even take yourself down memory lane of like, oh, I remember when I bought that mug. Like that was so fun. I went out with and all of a sudden you're out of the mode of that panic or that anxiety. And you're in this delicious moment where you can savor something that brings a spark of joy or happiness. And that's really helpful. So orienting is a really helpful practice to stick in your back pocket that you can use all day, every day. And even when you're in a conversation with someone, I find it really helpful. Most people's eyes, it's uncomfortable to make constant eye contact, right? So just allowing your eyes to shift to the right or shift to the left, the person you're speaking to isn't necessarily going to notice as much because it's a natural process that happens when we're talking to people, but it can allow you to continually send cues of safety to yourself while you're engaged in conversation with somebody else. So that's one that I love to use because it's really helpful and immediately can bring a sense of settling to the system. The other one that I love to do is a soothing self touch, right? And not everyone likes to bring their hand to their chest in public per se. That is my go to. But a really helpful one too is even your hands by your sides, like your hands right on your pants if you're wearing, depending on the fabric. Maybe it feels really good just to rub your hands on your thighs. Yeah. We have nerve endings on our skin called CT afferent fibers that have been studied, and especially with slow downward strokes, they communicate directly with the emotional regulation centers in our brain. And they can send positive signals to soothe and settle, also help release oxytocin, that love hormone, that bonding hormone. But oxytocin is also the antidote to its partner hormone, vasopressin, which is our stress response hormone. So oxytocin is actually anti-inflammatory. So touch can offer that stimulation. So just placing a static hand or a gentle stroking, rubbing can be really helpful. And you can do that in public as well, right? No one's going to say anything because people touch themselves all the time. So that's a really, and then your
Those are
breath.
all great.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, please. This is the important one.
I was going to say your breath is always with you. It's your greatest ally. And I think most of us take our breath for granted because it's happening automatically, but we can bring it under our intentional awareness. Even checking in, am I breathing? A lot of us, myself included, in moments when I'm concentrating or feeling a little overwhelmed, I'm holding my breath. Yeah. So just inviting that awareness. Am I breathing? And I think many of us try and force calm. We think we're supposed to be calm all the time, that calm equals regulation, which is not true. Regulation is really being in the optimal state to meet the challenge that's in front of us. So sometimes a calming breath, like an inhale with a nice long exhalation that activates that parasympathetic system, is that rest and relaxation response is helpful. But sometimes if we're kind of what I call down in the basement where we're shut down and collapsed, we need a little bit more energy with our breath. Right. So, because our inhale activates our sympathetic nervous system, it's our exhale that activates our parasympathetic. So, using our breath to help bring a little bit more energy into the system or a little bit more calm into the system. There's lots of different techniques that can be used. So yeah, our breath is a incredible tool that's with you all the time. It's free. You can you can use it at your disposal throughout the day.
Again, thank you for sharing all of those simple tools that people can take 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, anywhere you're at, to really help signal that sense of safety. I love orienting. That's one of my favorites. And so, like, I work from home, I'm in my office. So I make sure that I surround myself with things that bring me joy, from the artwork on my walls to I hung tapestries over my windows. And yes, now I'm not seeing what's going on outside, but I do early in the morning when the sun comes through those tapestries, it shines the colors on my walls. I have like a tree of life that is very fluorescent. So it lights up the whole room with rainbow colors. And so I was trying to think when I'm, focused on how can I improve like my sound quality for the podcast. It's covering the windows so that you don't have that sound reverberation off the glass. I was like, okay, well, what can I do that's pleasant? And I was
Mm,
like, wow, I have a bunch of tapestries that I used to have hanging in my office. So I picked my favorite ones and those cover my windows. And I have a stuffed sloth. I love sloths. They're my favorite spirit animal. And so I have a stuffed sloth that lays on its belly and it has this very big smile. And so anytime I just need that something that's cute and cuddly and brings me joy, I just glance to the right of my monitor and there's my stuffed sloth. And so it's finding these things or just taking a minute to kind of pay attention. Look around, see what's in your space. It really brings in that sense of calm.
yeah.
My husband and I right now don't have any small children, but we do have a 9-year-old grandson that pops over. So we have an elf on a shelf because of my grandson.
Mhm.
And we have committed to each other that we will keep that elf on a shelf's joy alive. And so we surprise each other every day. with where the elf is hanging out, or my husband will leave a post-it note, or he'll move one of my other stuffed animals from our bedroom and bring it and put it on my desk. So it's the first thing I see in the morning. And these are all things that just bring me joy in a world that's very chaotic. And I try not to welcome that chaos into my morning. I don't jump on my phone and doom scroll and what's going on in the media and politics and the world. I find a nice soothing podcast or some nice binaural beats to listen to, focus on getting in some movement in my morning, my nourishment, even stepping outside and getting a few minutes of that vitamin D sunlight, sipping my coffee or tea, maybe doing a lap around my backyard in the grass and in bare feet during the summer. I spent the other day grounding, digging in my flower beds, getting my flower beds ready for the winter. I mean, all of that, like you said, it comes right through our skin.
Totally.
And my body just welcomes that time in the dirt. And it's a great way to kind of start my day before I sit down for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 hours without moving too much. So, yeah, learning to pay attention, learning to read your body, ask your body, like, "Where am I feeling this?"
Hmm.
So, learning how to do, like, a body inventory was very important in my trauma healing.
Yeah.
And then the next level to that was then the somatic practices, so being able to use my breath to move those things through my body, so they weren't trapped in my body. So it's this big, giant picture. I
Yeah.
think that learning all these things, I've developed this amazing toolbox that I get to have with me all the time. I get to share with others. So thank you for sharing those things like orienting and a soothing soft touch and your breath, which we always have with us. I think a lot of people aren't really paying attention to their breath. Are you breathing rapidly? Are you shallow breathing? Do you know how to breathe into your diaphragm? Do you know what that looks like and feels like? And so all of these things are such wonderful tools that we get to share with people in spaces like a podcast. So again, I thank you for your time. Um, for someone who's struggling right now, feeling like they've tried everything, what are a few words of hope that you can offer to those people?
Yeah. I think first honoring all your effort. No doubt you have done so many of the things. And also, maybe, there's always more things to try, and it's not to exhaust you or overwhelm you. But my guess is that perhaps listening to a podcast like this, your curiosity might be sparked of like, well, maybe I haven't gone down that path yet. Maybe I haven't really gotten to know my nervous system and the things in my life that help me make sense of what's going on, that right, that you're not broken, that your system is behaving exactly how it thinks it's supposed to be responding based on the information that it had that shaped it, from early in childhood or some period of your life, and it's still responding as if it still needs to be in protective defensive mode. So, where are the places and spaces in your life that maybe you can invite a little bit of joy and curiosity, right? So, I think sometimes we feel helpless and hopeless, but it's that, you know, that invitation of, yes, you have tried a lot of things and that got you here, but it's not the end of the road, right? There's always something else. And by showing up here and listening to a podcast like this, hopefully it sparked your curiosity of that, there's more. There's more to learn about oneself that can be the most empowering and the most healing, even if you still struggle with a certain condition. I think that's also something that I want to name and normalize, right? We talk about healing. People think healing is like, I never have this problem again. And really, healing is kind of that awareness of like, this is happening. I know what's happening now, and I have some agency and control over how I want to meet that challenge so it doesn't overwhelm me in the same way, to the same degree. take me down that spiral for as long, but it doesn't mean I'll never feel anxious. My skin will never flare again. It's kind of like, this is happening. Let me get curious. What else is happening? And maybe, right, peel back the layers one at a time. I think that was the words are don't give up hope because there's always something else. And sometimes reaching out to somebody. I think one of the things with chronic illness, especially with skin conditions, is we isolate. We think we're supposed to figure it out ourselves. And when things don't go according to plan, we've tried all the things, we think we failed, and then we isolate. And we know that loneliness is at epidemic proportions, but it's also one of the most significant, metrics we have of longevity and health and wellness. So reaching out to somebody else is really brave. It's vulnerable, but it's also probably one of the most important things for your overall health.
All of that was absolutely perfect. On that last note, one, I'd like to ask you where people can find you because I think that's the next piece of having people on a podcast is to then provide those resources so that if they're kind of at that point where they feel they've tried everything and this has opened that curiosity and now they have learned that there are people like you who have looked at skin conditions with a different lens and that they're there to ask the right questions and to help you get the answers that you need. So where can people find you? And then I would also love for you to talk a little bit about the free gift that you're offering to my listeners.
Yeah. So people can find me at my website, drkeirabarr.com. On LinkedIn and Instagram is kind of where I spend time. My book is always available. It's kind of a good foundational framework. I've done a lot more work and it was before I really dove into somatics and trauma, but it can be a really helpful resource for some of the basic parameters that we were talking about. And then the gift that I created is it's a guide. It's a short, simple guide that covers a lot of what we talked about today, the mind skin connection, the nervous system, and it's called Stress Relief for Skin Relief and kind of helps people understand why things might be happening the way that they're happening with that mind skin connection. And then offers 3 simple, actionable practices that you can use today and every day to help bring a little bit more settling to your system that ultimately is going to help support your skin.
Thank you so much. I will make sure and include all of that information in the show notes, including a link to your book, a link to your podcast, so people can find you there as well. Thank you again so much, Dr. Kira, because your work really reminds us that healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about listening to the messages our body is sending and creating safety within ourselves. Um, if your skin has been crying out for attention through rashes, breakouts, flares, perhaps it's not about fighting your skin, but befriending your nervous system. You can connect with Dr. Kira at the Center for Mind Skin Medicine, learn more about her somatic skincare process. All the links will be in the show notes. If this conversation resonated with you, please share this episode with somebody who needs a little more compassion for themselves and their skin, because together we can change our resilience, our stress levels, and there is so much that's available out there to us. So, again, Dr. Kira, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you so much. I was so excited for this conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much.